This is the last one. So,
okay, this, my first plate shows Odysseus's journey as this particular author sees it. They don't all see it the same way. So I use that as the first plate. So these are books 21 to 24, the last 4 books. We start with 21. These pictures are from a French children's book that I've taken that I thought was very
That's pretty
interesting.
scary for kids.
Yeah, that's the Hydra. Okay, so I divide this particular book into 2 parts. The whole thing has to do with the bow contest. So the first part is preparations, and the second part is the contest itself, and you see that's the larger part, 72%. And what's interesting in this book is the character of Penelope and Telemachus, because they've changed at this moment now. Penelope is more aggressive towards the suitors. Telemachus has found his adulthood and is ready to help his father, so that you see the development of these 2 characters. But the important sections that I thought are worth talking about are the procurement of the bow. Every time something is going to be used, some prop is going to be used by Homer, it has to have a story behind it. He has to build up to it. So in this case, since the bow is going to be the main character of the book, it has to have a story. And as I said before concerning these stories, these digressions, these myths, Homer assumes that the myths are already known to the public, and so he only uses the parts that prove his point, whatever point he wants to make. So again, it becomes a bit confusing for most readers. I want to show this with a bow, just to let you see certain things. He starts to say in procurement of the bow that the bow was given to him through a character by the name of Eurytus. Now you have to know who Eurytus was. And in mythology, he is quite a popular figure. Eurytus was an expert bowman. He rivaled Hercules, who is supposed to be the greatest bowman. But at one point, Eurytus committed hubris. He complained that he could probably be as good as Apollo. And you don't do that with gods. So, because he said that, he was punished by Apollo. Either struck dead or something horrible happened to him. The bow then was given to his son, Iphitus. And Homer mentions these characters in this book. And Iphitus now has the bow. Well, there occurred an incident where Iphitus had to go to some place. I won't name the place. Actually, it's Mycenae. He had to go to this place called Mycenae to retrieve 12 stallions that Hercules had stolen sometime before. At the same time, Odysseus, as a young man, was sent to the same place to retrieve 300 sheep that were stolen. So Iphitus and Odysseus meet, and they get on with each other. They like each other. And they exchange gifts, as they usually do. And Iphitus gives him the bow. He says, "You seem to know more about bows than I do, and this was my father's, and I give you this." And Odysseus gives Iphitus something else. But the story goes on, and Homer mentions parts of it. The parts he mentioned is that Iphitus goes to Hercules to retrieve his mares, but Hercules kills him, which is unusual for Hercules, because you don't do that to guests. But he did. He killed him. The reason he killed him was because Hercules loved his sister, Iole. And he asked Eurytus at some point back that if he could have her in marriage. And the father denied him. So Hercules then got upset. He burned down the whole town of Eurytus and never forgot this. So when the brother Iphitus came for the mares that he had stolen, he killed him because he couldn't have Iole. So all of that is part of the myth. But as you read it, you'll see how Homer picks and chooses, selects just certain things that emphasize the bow. He's not interested in anything else of what I'm saying. He's just interested in the bow. And he uses the myth to explain that. So that's what happens in book 21, lines 13 to 41. Not that many lines, actually. It's what? Very few. But he tells this story. And then the other thing of importance is that Penelope decides to fetch the bow. Well, why does she do it at this particular point in book 21? Because we were prepared for this in 19. The thing is, Odysseus secretly, through his gaze and all, told her to do this. And so now she goes through with what she feels her husband wants her to do. And she fetches the bow. And it's interesting when you're reading about the bow to see how it's defined and described. It's described as an instrument, like the instrument the singers use. It has to be tuned. It makes a certain noise. And it's, again, comparing it to the singer who is singing the song, using the lyre. They're comparing the bow to that. And it's the bow that's going to bring an end to the Odyssey, just like the lyre preserves this story for all time. So there's a comparison there. Then she announces the contest to get underway. She comes to the suitors now. She's very bold. She makes all kinds of negative remarks about them, and also tells them that if they really want to pursue her and woo her, they should give gifts. And of course, they're willing to do anything. So that's another clever device, because she's going to get something out of it, which will make her husband happy. So they announce them. And then the trials with the bow begin. And the first one to try the bow is this character called Myrsiades, who fails miserably, as we expect him to do, and admits that it's impossible to bend this bow. And then Telemachus says, I want to try. And he tries 3 times and fails. The 4th time, he almost is ready to make it, but his father signals him, and he puts it away. Now, there's a lot of Freudian going on things here. Does the father do it because the son is going to be able to do it and show that the son is equal to the father? Or is it that Odysseus doesn't want to give anything away yet? But it also shows you to what extent Telemachus has matured at this point. He's ready to be a junior Odysseus. He can bend the bow, although it takes him 4 tries to Odysseus 1. So you have a lot going on then, on that situation. And then you have the 2 herdsmen, Eumaeus, the swineherd, and Philoetius, the cowherd, who are revealed to Odysseus. He calls them outside at some point during this book and says, do you recognize me yet? I am he, is the way that your translation reads. I am he, I am Odysseus. And he shows them the scar, and they embrace him and all. So he prepares then to help with the suitors. So now there are 4 men involved: Odysseus, his son, Eumaeus, and Philoetius, who are going to help him. And the weapons that they uncalled for at this point change from what we learned earlier in the Odyssey, where Odysseus had told Telemachus, put away a shield, a helmet, and 2 spears for each of us. Now, of course, they need that times 4. So that changes, and that happens in oral literature. It doesn't always remain the same. Many things change throughout the story. After several suitors attempt to bend the bow, which they can't do, finally it's postponed by the main suitor Antinous, claiming that this is Apollo's holiday on this particular day, which is also significant because Apollo is the archer god and it's his holiday, and in a way it's his bow is going to take care of all these suitors. But Antinous wants time. He wants to rub down the bow, he wants to make it more pliable, etc. And he says we shouldn't be doing it on a holiday. Let's postpone it and we'll continue on the following day. And he gives another myth that is important called Eurytion myth, a very important myth in mythology, which in Homer's time, now I don't know how much of the myth Homer knew at the time, because we, as an audience, know the myth through Ovid, who is Roman and comes later. It's in his work, The Metamorphoses, in the 12th book of the Metamorphoses, where he tells us about this myth. But Eurytion was a centaur, half man and half horse. And he was invited to a wedding of people that he knew. There were 2 tribes living in close proximity. And Eurytion was on one tribe, and the wedding was taking place with the other tribe. So he came to the wedding. He got very drunk with his crew of other centaurs, and they tried to make out with a bride. And because of that, the groom got very upset, and with the help of Theseus, another great hero, an Athenian hero, who has his own myths, probably the second best known character in mythology after Hercules and Theseus. Theseus killed Eurytion, and got rid of all the other centaurs. Now, Antinous is telling us this story, but he's telling the story to the beggar Odysseus as if to say, just like Eurytion was thrown out of the wedding, you're going to have the same thing happen to you by mixing with us here in this Megaron. But the story becomes very ironic, because although he's saying it about Odysseus, it applies more to him, who is already drunk, and he's saying these things. So it's in a way a prophecy, it's something foreboding of what's going to happen. And that's the way Homer uses these myths. But that's an important myth. Again, very short. You can see from 295 to lines 304, Homer doesn't waste words. And that's why he picks out very specific incidences from each myth. Yes?
How would Homer phrase it to describe someone who was drunk?
How does he phrase it? He just says he's inebriated, he's drunk. He drank too much. That's very straightforward. And then, after all this, the beggar, Odysseus, asks if he can try his hand at the bow. And of course, everybody's insulted. How dare a beggar ask for such a thing? And Penelope intercedes and says, look, we have nothing to lose. I'm not going to marry him, even if he could do this. I'll give him some clothes and some shoes and send him on his way if he wins. But they still resist till Telemachus takes over. Again, this shows the growth of Telemachus, Penelope coming out more and more. And Telemachus says, you know, the bow belongs to me. I am the head of the house now, and I can give it to whomever I want. So he tells the swineherd, take the bow and give it to this beggar, and let him try. Well, the beggar takes it, immediately he strings the bow, and the book ends on 21, because next comes the killings. But again, as Homer does, he wants to build up tension. So that's what we have in this book in 21. Now, when we go to 22, 22 is the most Iliadic of the books. That is, it's all about fighting. It's like the Iliad. And a lot that happens can be compared to the Iliad, as you'll see. I divide it into 3 parts in this way. Odysseus fights the suitors in the first part, about a fourth of the book. The suitors retaliate, that's the larger part of the book, and then the aftermath of the battle. So here you have all these different names of suitors that come up to question Odysseus, who, as the book opens, shoots an arrow through the neck of Antinous, the main suitor, and he kills him immediately. And interesting enough, as he kills them, the faces, they fall into the food that they have been eating. So the very thing they've been doing, their greed, is now emphasized as they flop into turn over the tables, spill the wine, spill the food. So everyone feels that since the leader is killed, that this must have been a mistake, just a lucky break for this beggar. He shot and it happened to hit Antinous. But immediately Odysseus takes off his rags and says, I'm back. And now it's my turn for all the things that you have done to me. And he names actually 5 different sins that he feels that the suitors have committed. The first 3 is that they were wooing his wife, which they shouldn't be. They were making love to his property, his maids, which they shouldn't be doing. They were trying to murder Telemachus. Those are 3, and there are 2 more that he mentions later on. Oh, they were abusing his guests. You cannot abuse your guests, and there's 1 more that comes up later on. So he tells them this as he begins to shoot arrows, and he just has so many arrows to shoot. And pretty soon he's going to be out of arrows. So he tells his son, we need weapons, because I'm almost out. And so Telemachus goes into the room with the weapons to retrieve enough for the 4 people involved. The 2 herdsmen, his father, and himself. And then we get the story of Melanthius. We have to take care of him. Melanthius is the 3rd herdsman, the goat herd. And of course, he's been bad all along, and he has to be punished. And here you get his punishment. They catch him in the storeroom, who is getting weapons for the other side, and they raise him up to the ceiling. They tie him up and raise him to the ceiling. All horrible things that happen after that to him, all of which Athena approves, so it's okay. So we go through the various suitors, and the aftermath. There's some interesting things in this particular book that I want to mention. Let me see if I can. I have them marked. There are all kinds of things going throughout these books that are, you can't mention them all. Some of the more interesting things here are, we go to the second main suitor, whose name was Eurymachus. And after he sees that his co-partner, co-suitor is killed, he tries to appeal to Odysseus to let him live. And he says, I admit we did wrong, we apologize and we can make up for all the wrongs by giving you so much gold and so many animals, each of us, if you stop your anger. And of course, this is where the Iliad comes in, because it's exactly the same thing that was presented to the Achilles in the Iliad for another reason. When Agamemnon says, I'm sorry for taking your woman, but I'm willing to give you gifts. And Achilles says, gifts aren't enough. They don't mean anything. It's my honor that's at stake, and that will never come back. Well, Odysseus says something similar. He says, Eurymachus, if you gave me all your father's possessions, all that you have now, and what you could add from elsewhere, even so, I would not stay my hands from the slaughter until I had taken revenge for all the suitors' transgressions. So it's not his honor that he's worried about here. It's what's right. It's justice. It's law. And that's a big difference between the two epics. The first one emphasizes honor a great deal. This one emphasizes law, what's right. They keep talking throughout about a goddess called Themis, Themis. And Themis is the goddess of law, or what's right. And now this becomes important in the Odyssey. So, the next one to die then is Eurymachus, after Odysseus makes this point. But the third man to die, which is also Freudian, if you think about it, is Amphinomos. Amphinomos was the suitor that Penelope liked best. And it's interesting that Telemachus, the son, kills the man that if she were to select somebody, that's the one she would select. There's an Oedipal thing going on here. But of course, this doesn't come up till you read Freud, and then you can put these things together. So there might be something there. After this, they get the weapons. They have the weapons. They bring all out. They arm. They get rid of Melanthius. And it's also interesting that Melanthius, you'll now learn at this point, is the brother of the girl that's causing the most problems among the maids. Melanthia has a similar name. And they both happen to be the son and daughter of Dolius, who is the manager of the farm where Laertes happens to be living. But Dolius, doesn't seem to know anything about his daughter and son and what's going on, because he's on Odysseus' side, and he's been very faithful. It becomes kind of complicated here with these two characters, as we find out later. Melanthius, as I said, is caught in the storeroom, and this is what Odysseus says when they do this. Telemachus and I will hold off the haughty suitors for all their fury here inside the palace. You two, meaning the two herdsmen, twist the feet of Melanthius and his arms behind him, put him away in the chamber, and fasten boards behind him, then make him secure with a braided rope, and hoist him upward along the high columns till you fetch him up to the roof beams, and leave him there till everything is over. And then at the end, when all the suitors have died, when they cleaned up the place, they cut off his nose, his private part, his ears, and that's okay, because Athena says it's okay. So that's what happens there. There are other suitors that come, I won't mention them, that come into the picture who threaten anyone that tries to help Odysseus in this case, that they're going to punish them. So it shows how there's always a very negative picture of the suitors in this book, because they're all going to be killed, and we have to be on Odysseus' side. let me see if there was anything. It goes through by name, naming who shot who in here. And then at the end, we have two of the 128 suitors that are saved. The first one is Phemios, the singer. Homer never kills off the singers of tales because he is one of them, and what we know of Homer is based on these two singers in the Odyssey, Demodocus and Phemios. And the other one that's saved is the herald, Methon, who always takes messages to Penelope to tell her what the suitors are doing. So those two men are spared. Everyone else is killed throughout here. And that brings us to the end of 22. So everyone now, all the suitors have been killed. And no one knows anything about this because the doors are locked. Odysseus has asked for the singers to sing as if a wedding is taking place, so that the people outside think that a wedding is going on. Penelope has made her choice, and all the noise that they hear is merely celebration. And that works. So when we get to 23, this is the things I talked about. Oh, the maids too are punished. Out of the 50 maids, 12 are selected as the maids who had gone over to the suitors, as lovers for the suitors. And they, Odysseus says, take them and punish them, kill them in other words. But Telemachus, again showing his growth and his maturity, feels that that's too easy. He wants to punish them more, and so he has them hung at the end. This is the part that Margaret Atwood, the Canadian author, wrote a book called The Penelopiad, where she takes exception and feels Homer made a mistake in punishing those maids this way. As a feminist, she doesn't see why those maids deserve this kind of punishment. But that's what they did. So in 23, we have the reunion, finally. That is, Penelope finally embraces the beggar as her husband. But the question here is, you can see the pre-reunion is 55% of the book, and then you have the reunion, and then you have the post-reunion. So the whole book is on Odysseus and Penelope coming together. And the question has always been, why does Penelope still refuses to accept her husband, even though I mentioned to you that by book 19, she knows who the beggar is. And that's why we have the bow contest, because she knows it. And she sets it up knowing that he's the only one that can handle the bow. And whatever she feels later on about whether she's done the right thing or not, it's merely being nervous whether she did the right thing or not. It's not that she doesn't recognize her husband. She has doubts about whether the plan is going to work. But when we come to 23, we still see her wandering, still not being able to approach him, which makes her son very upset and says, "Why are you so cold?" And that's where she says in this book that I read last time, she says, we have our own secret signs, and eventually it'll work out. But what her real problem is, that I mentioned, that people don't consider as much, it's not that she doesn't recognize her husband. She wants to know whether the Odysseus that has returned is the Odysseus that she sent to Troy. To what extent has the 20 years changed him? What has the war done to him? And of course, that's when I mentioned this psychologist in Boston, Jonathan Shea, who is using these books to treat Vietnam veterans. So in his book, Odysseus in America, he talks about these books and what happens to veterans when they return for a prolonged war, how they change. They're not the men that you send out at the beginning. They come back very different human beings. And that's what Penelope is worried about. Is this the same Odysseus that she sent away? And so she comes up with a bed trick, which is an important part of this book, the very first part. And the bed trick is that we know that Odysseus built this bed out of the trunk of a tree, an olive tree, which shows you how the marriage is rooted in the earth, the marriage of Odysseus and Penelope, sanctioned by Athena, since olive is her wood. So it has something to say about their marriage. And also, along with all of this, as we're reading all this, your mind also has to go to Agamemnon, because there's constant comparison between the Myrsiades, that's the family name of Odysseus. They take their family name from the grandfather, Elkesiad is the grandfather of Odysseus, so they're called the Myrsiades, and Atreus is the father of Agamemnon, and they're called the Atreides. So it's always a comparison between these two families. Why does Odysseus and family survive, but Agamemnon and family doesn't? And when we say family, we're thinking Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, Orestes. Father, mother, son. Odysseus, Penelope, Telemachus. And they're constantly compared to each other. And it comes out here again. So Penelope is clever, she is faithful, she is trustworthy, all the things that Clytemnestra was not. So because she knows that Odysseus built this bed, and also that she knows that the moment he left, she abandoned that bedroom and now sleeps upstairs, not on the main floor where we're told this is, and that the woman that took care of that bedroom, Actoris was her name, is no longer in her employment. Either she died or left, and she's the only one that knew about the bedroom. And since Penelope knows that no other man has ever entered that bedroom, because she's faithful, she can now ask Odysseus to go and move the bed. And if he's the real Odysseus, he'll know this is impossible. And she's not only worried that she might be fooled because the beggar is not Odysseus, but what if he's a god, since so many gods appear to women? Well, as far as she's concerned, no one has been in the bedroom, so the gods wouldn't even know. They're not all knowing like they are here. There are things that they don't know if they haven't been there. So he can't be a god if the beggar says, yeah, I'll move the bed for you. Odysseus says, who was the culprit that ruined my bed? How can I move it since I made it out of a trunk? And the moment he says that, she knows it's her husband. And at that moment, she embraces him. So that's the reunion. Also, the bed trick shows that she's a female Odysseus. She's as tricky and wily as he is, and that's why they get together. The word that I mentioned before that they keep using throughout here is homophrosini, which means like-mindedness. And that's what Clytemnestra and Agamemnon were not. But these two are. They're merely the opposite side of the same coin, male, female, but it's the same. And there's a simile that's interesting that comes up once they unite here, which is the consummation of the marriage. Remember, there are similes throughout the Odyssey and the Iliad, which is the most important characteristic of Homer. but some of them are worth looking at, and the way he uses them. Yeah, here it is. So, she spoke, meaning Penelope, and still more roused in him the passion for weeping. He wept as he held his lovely wife, whose thought were virtuous. And then we have the simile. And as when the land appears welcome to men who are swimming after Poseidon has smashed their strong-built ship on the open water, pounding it with the weight of wind and the heavy seas, and only a few escape the gray water landward by swimming, with a thick scurf of salt coated upon them, and gladly they set foot on the shore, escaping the evil. That's the first part of the simile. And so far, you notice, it's about Odysseus, or you think it's about Odysseus, because he's the one that suffered all these things. But the punchline is, so welcome was her husband to her as she looked upon him. She becomes Odysseus, suffering all these things at sea because of Poseidon. It's reversed to show you how united they are, how they are like each other. So you start out with a simile that refers to Odysseus as the seaman, and you find out that it's Penelope that is being referred to as the one suffering all these adventures on the sea. So that's how he uses similes in this way. Very clever, ironic. He changes them. And then you get a prophecy, which is important for later literature. And this is Tiresias' prophecy. They get together now. Once they reunited, they tell their stories to each other. It's interesting that Penelope's stories, it's only 4 lines long. I've suffered, period. He goes on and on for several pages. And he starts out by telling her first what Tiresias said. And what Tiresias, the prophet in the underworld, told Odysseus is what later writers after Homer took to continue the story of the Odyssey. Dante does this, Virgil does this, later in the 20th century, Kazantzakis in his Odyssey does this, Milton uses it. So there are all kinds of writers, and this is what he says. Tiresias tells him, and this is through the words of Odysseus, your heart will have no joy in this, and I myself am not happy, since he told me, he's telling Penelope, to go among many cities of men, taking my well-shaped oar in my hands and bearing it, until I come where there are men living who know nothing of the sea. Once he comes to Ithaca, he's to take his oar, put it on his shoulder, and continue inland till he comes to people who don't know anything about the sea. They're that far away from the sea. And who eat food that is not mixed with salt, who never have known ships whose cheeks are painted purple, who never have known well-shaped oars, which act for ships as wings do. And then he told me a very clear proof. I will not conceal it. When, as I walk, some other wayfarer happens to meet me and says I carry a winnow fen on my bright shoulder, that is, they mistake the oar for something you use to work wheat. Then I must plant my well-shaped oar in the ground and render ceremonious sacrifice to the Lord Poseidon, 1 ram and 1 bull, and a mounter of sows, a boar, pig, and make my way home again, and render holy hecatombs to the immortal gods who hold the wide heaven, all of them in order. Death will come to me from the sea, in some altogether unwarlike way, and it will end me in the ebbing time of a sleek old age. My people about me will prosper, and this, he told me, would be accomplished. So this is food now for later writers. And there is a work that follows the Odyssey called the Telegony, written much later after Homer, which says that Telemachus marries Calypso, or is it Circe? I don't know. One of the two. And Telegonius, who becomes the son of Circe, marries Penelope and mistakenly kills Odysseus when he comes, when they get very old. That's another epic. But it all comes from these few lines that made people continue this story. And then comes the summary, which is important. Now, in ancient times, in the 3rd century BC, the 3 leading scholars of Homer, all 3 of them thought that the Odyssey should end in line 296, which is right here where I'm reading, right below Myrsiades, which says, when she had brought them to the chamber, that is the maid, leads Penelope and Odysseus to their bedroom. When she had brought them to the chamber, she went back. They then gladly went together to bed, and their old ritual. That used to be early on the end of the Odyssey, and they thought that the rest of it was spurious, that it was added after Homer. But more recent scholarship says that's not the case, that there are too many things that haven't been resolved yet. What about Laertes? What about the suitors' families? What about the dead suitors that are lying still dead? What's going to happen there? So the story continues, and the way it continues immediately after this line is that Odysseus in bed is telling Penelope his adventures, which is also objectionable to some, because we already know the adventures. Why summarize them again? But it says something about Odysseus. For example, he never mentions the women that he was with. Nausicaa is not to be found anywhere. He completely puts her aside. He does mention Circe in passing and Calypso, but not that he lived 7 years with one and a whole year with the other. And later tradition says had children by both. 2 children by Calypso and I think 1 by Circe, according to later mythology. So that's what goes on after line 296 in book 93. And I had down here 2 words that were problematic with scholars, because line 296, the end of the Odyssey, uses the word telos, which means the end, and the word peras, which means the end. But it's not the end the way you think. It's like this part is over. So scholars make a lot of those 2 words. It doesn't say the Odyssey is over. It merely says we're going into another episode. So they debate those 2 things. And these are the words that I said previously, the Myrsiades, who is Odysseus' family, and the Atridae, who are Agamemnon's family, that are constantly compared throughout here. That brings us to the end of 23. So they're together now. Odysseus has ordered that the Megaron, the big room, is cleaned with sulfur to get rid of all of the blood and all the smell and all. And then he deals with the maids, and they're ready for the final book, which is also very controversial because the final book happens to be, this was the simile that I read to you. I had it up here so you could see it. I forgot I had it there. So the last book is Peace. The problem is the second Nicaea. An epic usually has one descent to the underworld. The Odyssey is the only epic that has 2 descents to the underworld, which becomes a problem for many scholars. 37% of the book is on that second Nicaea. And not only that, but we know that when people died, in Homer and in early Greek literature, their souls cannot go to the underworld until they're buried or cremated. That's what happens earlier in the Odyssey when, what's his name, falls off the roof, and Calypsos and Odysseus has to come back and bury him before the man's soul can rest. Well, in this case, the suitors are in the underworld without having been buried. They're still lying around in the Megaron. So people ask, how can that be? Well, I guess the only way you can explain it, Hermes is leading them. He's a god. He can do whatever he wants. So since he's the god who leads souls to the underworld, it's an exception that he takes them down himself. But if you were to die without the having a god to lead you there, then you have to wait for burial before you can
What
rest.
would happen, for instance, to the people who were snatched up by Scylla,
Say that again?
or eaten by,
Oh, Scylla.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
Cyclops.
Polyphemus.
Their souls go to the underworld, I guess, and I don't know when
They aren't
they're
buried.
sent over. They cannot cross the Styx with Charon unless they're buried.
They get just line up along the
But
river.
Homer doesn't mention that. I mean, there are all kinds of exceptions. That's poetic license in poetry. Some things just aren't mentioned. So that's the first part. And the first part, this 37%, is actually very interesting because it also makes a case for Penelope knowing Odysseus in Book 19. Because one of the suitors that we haven't heard of till now, Amphimenos, is a young man who is part of the souls that go to the underworld. And Agamemnon asks him when he goes under there, why are you here? What happened? Were you drowned, etc.? And he tries to explain what happened in Book 23. But the way he remembers it is exactly what happens in 19 when we say that Penelope knew who her husband was. And we'll get to it in a minute. And then the second part is Odysseus meeting his father, which is important because we've left Laertes out so far, and that's the final lie that Odysseus uses. So he gets back with his father, and the very end, the third part, is that the suitor's father's family attack, and there's going to be a civil war till Zeus says enough. We're going to bring this to the end. So this is what happens in 24. There are three main people in the first part of the underworld: Agamemnon, Achilles, and Amphimedon. I said Amphimenos, it's Amphimedon testimony. So when these souls are brought to the underworld, Agamemnon meets them first. He's there, and he questions this man, number 3 here, why are you here? And that's when he tells us his story, as he knows it. And that's of interest here. Let me see where that is. That's, maybe it's before that.
120?
Yeah, it's right at the beginning, I think. No, they're going under. It's hard to find these things when you want them. Yeah, it's 125, line 125. It's 65 lines, but I'm just going to show a few of them. His whole speech is about 65 lines. He says, we were courting the wife of Odysseus, who had been long gone. She would not refuse the hateful marriage, nor would she bring it about. but she was planning our death and black destruction. As far as he's concerned, she was in this from the beginning, planning it. And that's why she was weaving the shroud for her father-in-law, to put them off, hoping that it would give her time and something might happen during that time. That's the weaving trick. And she did that for 3 years. And it's usually those 3 years that the suitors are after her. Because some people ask, if Odysseus is away 10 years, were the suitors eating out of house and home for 10 years? No, it was the last 3 that they decided that's enough time for the man to be gone. You probably never return, and she should now make up her mind. So they talk about this, and then he says at one point, around 150 or so, these two, after compacting their plot, talking about Odysseus and Penelope, he says, these two, after compacting their plot of a foul death for the suitors, made their way to the glorious town. I guess he's actually talking about Eumaeus and Odysseus, that Odysseus goes to the farm and with the swineherd sets up a plot to get rid of the suitors. And then later on, around line 166, it says, then in the craftiness of his mind, meaning Odysseus, in the craftiness of his mind, he urged his lady to set the bow and the great iron in front of the suitors, the contest for us ill-fated men, the start of our slaughter. So here's a suitor that knows that the two were getting together when she was interviewing him. And they realize that now, which lends authority to an early recognition in 19. And that's where all of that comes from. So that's the third part. The first part on Agamemnon is interesting because Agamemnon is standing there with Achilles and their retinue, the other people associated with them, Patroclus and others. And Agamemnon is still upset that his honor, kleos meaning honor, has not worked out as Achilles did and as Odysseus did, because he was killed by his wife. Whereas the head commander of the army, he should have had great honor, and he should have received back home in a way that the others have received. Now, this in a way is ironic also, because you know that Achilles said it's better to be a nobody on earth than a king in Hades. And he still believes this. He's come to that. And yet he's the one that has received all this honor. But Agamemnon is still on this thing. And he's comparing himself to Achilles. And he thinks of the funeral of Achilles. What a great funeral he had. And how he was honored. Now this is also the Odyssey trying to continue from the Iliad. Some people say 2 different people wrote these epics. One the Iliad, one the Odyssey. Others say that the same person wrote both. Others say that many hands went into writing all of them. So we're not sure. But here, in this particular episode, you see some competition. The Iliad ends with a funeral of Hector. And the funeral of Hector takes 9 days, for he's mourned. On the 10th day, he is cremated. On the 11th day, he is buried, celebrated. Now we're told Achilles had a funeral. But here we're told he is mourned 17 days. On the 18th day, he is cremated. On the 19th, he's celebrated. Twice the time that was given to Hector, which makes it to be better. And the Odyssey makes a point of that through Agamemnon. So it's not only comparing him to Achilles, saying this is better, in the Odyssey it's better, but you're also comparing Agamemnon's disappointment to Achilles still, and it goes on that way, yes.
Well, it uses the house of Atreus.
If what?
Atreus,
Yeah.
who's a horrible person. Does that sort of go down the line?
It's part of the family. It's the curse of the family. That's the whole idea with the Atreus story, because the curse follows. So when you go into the tragedies, when they talk about the tragedies, you see this, the curse of the house of Atreus. Atreus has his problem, just like Atreus's wife is being abused by his brother Thyestes. So then Agamemnon's wife is being abused by Thyestes' son. So it follows. The line goes down, generation after generation. So yeah, it's all part of that. But it's interesting with this testimony here in the underworld that you have between the suitors and Agamemnon and Achilles. You see the jealousies that are still ongoing with these warriors, the fact that they're all in Hades and yet they're talking about honor and how they can't let it go. And the only one who really has the honor, Achilles, seems to be the least interested, because he knows that it means little. Nothing really means anything once you're not there anymore. And that's the point. And then you get to the lie of Laertes. We go now back from the underworld. We go back to Odysseus, who is sneaking out early in the morning to go visit his father at the farm so that no one will notice that he's leaving. He told Penelope not to say anything to anybody. Don't open the door. No one knows anything. But in the meantime, word gets around that the suitors are dead, and a leader emerges whose name is Eupeithes, who happens to be the father of Antinous. He lost his son, and he makes a good case. He calls an assembly. This is interesting also, because you begin to see again the symmetry in the Odyssey. The Odyssey at this point in 24 pretty much ends the way it started. At the very beginning, you had a father, Aegyptios is his name, who calls an assembly to complain about Odysseus because his son has gone to war and he knows nothing about him. He's the son who is eaten by the Cyclops first. The father doesn't know that.
And didn't get buried.
Yeah, but he's upset and he wants an assembly. And there's a prophet by the name of Halitherses that stands up at the assembly and says, you're all wrong. Nothing good is going to come of this. And Odysseus will return. Well, now in the last book, you have Eupeithes, the father of Antinous, saying the same thing. I want to call an assembly because my son is not coming back to me. And you have this same prophet, Halitherses, standing up and saying, no good is going to come out of this. So you see the symmetry, how from the beginning to the end. So I'm jumping a little ahead, but that's what happens at the very end. The lie, of course, is to try and bring the father around to meet his son. And Odysseus, people ask, why lie to the father when by the time Odysseus goes to the farm, he has been transformed by Athena again to himself. He's not a beggar anymore at this point. Why doesn't the father recognize him if he's been transformed? But maybe the old man is confused. He doesn't, and we're told about his confusion and all. So Odysseus tries a lie in order to bring him slowly to the recognition so he doesn't suffer. But at the point that the son, Odysseus, sees that the father is suffering more and more as he hears about his son, Odysseus cuts it short and he says, I am your son. But Laertes doesn't believe him at first. And the scar in this case isn't enough. because even a god can create a scar if he wants to fool somebody. So Laertes wants more proof. And Odysseus thinks and says, well, I'll give you something that even the gods don't know. When I was a kid, he says, you gave me 10 pear trees to plant. You gave me 13 apple trees. You gave me 40 fig trees. And you gave me 50 vines, grapevines, that I planted. And of course, the father says, this has to be my son now. No one else knows these numbers and these things unless he's the actual son. And that's a reunion between them. Then they both go back to the house, which is managed by Dolios and his wife. And Dolios has 6 sons. So between Dolios, the 6 sons, the 2 herdsmen, Odysseus and Telemachus, we have 12 people now that are ready to hold off the crowds that will be coming from Ithaca, the relatives. And no sooner do they mention this, there they come. And a civil war begins. And for the first time now, Laertes, Odysseus, and Telemachus are reunited. They're all in armor, and the 3 generations are going to stand up to everybody else. And they do so, and they begin to fight. But Zeus thunders and tells Athena, bring an end to this. No more of this. And so you have then the end. These are the last lines, 545 to 548, 4 lines that end the Odyssey. So spoke Athena, and with happy heart he obeyed her. Athena says to Odysseus, Zeus commands you not to fight. And pledges for the days to come, sworn to by both sides, were settled by Pallas Athena, daughter of Zeus of the Aegis, who had likened herself in appearance and voice to Mentor. The end. And that's the end of the Odyssey. And that's the end of me, too. Well, I guess that was it. So, any questions? Yeah.
Where did the expression Achilles' heel come from?
Oh, that's before Homer. Because if Homer knew that myth, that Achilles was only vulnerable on his heel, he would not have to have a god make him all that armor, which takes up a whole book in the Iliad describing the armor. He would need the armor. So it's a myth probably that was created sometime after Homer's work. But the myth is that when Achilles was born, the mother, Thetis, who is a goddess, wanted to preserve him, to make him strong. So she was told if she takes him by the heel and dips him in this pool, he will be okay. But the water didn't get to the heel that she's holding on to. So that's his vulnerable spot. But that's the story.
When Odysseus was given the bow, that was a pretty fine present. What did he give in return?
He gave a sword of some sort. But that also, throughout the 2 epics, is important, because whoever gets the greater gift is the greater person. So in the Iliad, which is the prime example, when the 2 warriors are exchanging, Diomedes and someone else is exchanging gifts, one gives his gold armor and the other to Diomedes, and Diomedes gives his silver armor. But it shows that Diomedes is a greater warrior. So whoever gets the greater gift is better. That's the way they show that.
You mentioned a book that is apparently the follow-up to the Odyssey. When would that have been written in relationship to the Odyssey?
The book that continues the Odyssey from where the Odyssey leaves off is 1939.
So really
It's called The
modern.
Odyssey, a modern sequel.
Oh.
But when Dante does his, that's in the 13th century, in the Inferno. where he uses part of that story that I mentioned.
But Dante didn't read Homer, did he? Didn't
He,
he read
he
somebody's
knew
translation?
Homer through Latin,
Latin.
through the Latin authors. He didn't know Greek, nor had he access to a Greek text. But the Odyssey was translated early on. Andronicus, something like that. I don't remember the author's name. Very early in the Roman period. That's why most of the versions that follow the Odyssey always go to the Latin part. You'll notice that in the Latin works, I'm thinking mostly of Virgil, the epics that come after that are not 24 books, they're 12, because the Aeneid is only in 12 parts. Now, either Virgil wanted it that way, or he died before he had completed more. But since he only did 12, everybody following him took the epic as being 12 works. Spenser's Faerie Queen and Milton's Paradise Lost and others. So they follow the Latin rather than the Greek. The Greek doesn't come back into circulation till the Pope's time and the, what do we call it, the neoclassical period, which is much later. Because remember, once the Romans took over, the Roman Empire split into the West and East. The East one was based in what today is Istanbul, which used to be Byzantium, which later became Constantinople, and then Istanbul. And it remained there till 1453, when the Muslims took over Byzantium, and then scholars moved west and brought those Greek works with them to the west. And so there was a revival of classical learning when
There
it
were
came over.
were there significant differences between the Latin version and the original?
There are some. I don't know exactly how many. I've never really read the Latin version of the Odyssey. But there were some changes. Maybe Ken knows. You're doing Latin. Anything else?
In the music world, when I was a kid, this was in Paris, I went to the opera, the Monteverdi's The Return of Ulysses,
Yes.
which was a very dramatic opera.
Yeah.
Even my kid,
Yeah.
some Christian.
Right.
So the influence was all over.
Oh yeah, there's in music and art, in literature, in poetry. It's amazing. Just following the Greek through the centuries, most of Greek literature after 1821 is based on the classics. The novels, the poetry, even contemporary literature, Greek literature. It's always going back. When George Seferis, the Nobel Prize winner, won the Nobel Prize in 1965, the Nobel Committee mentioned the weight of the past on the Greek present in giving him the Nobel Prize, because it's all about how modern Greece cannot equal its past. And they're always talking about that, what it was and what it is. So it's all over.
Could you say something about the gift giving and the modern thing? Because I don't know why people were giving gifts for no reason, and it seems like they had unending stuff to give away. And is that still, that gift giving habit, is that still
Hospitality is still,
carried into, okay, so maybe it's been,
it's part of hospitality.
so that would still be the modern way?
Yeah, I don't know that they actually would give you gifts, but in ancient times, there's no money. What you're worth is what you have, the gifts, and the gifts that you have spell out your honor. The greater the gifts, the greater the honor, because they honor you with those gifts. So when Odysseus goes to his storerooms, we're told of all the things he has, how many dresses and coats and this and that and swords. So that spells out their wealth. But hospitality is still there. There are a lot of stories that you read even in contemporary newspapers. I read once not that long ago where a German went back to Crete because he had been there during the war, during the Nazi occupation. And they received him warmly, they fed him, and when he left the house, they shot him. Because they remembered the Nazis. You don't do it, you show the hospitality in your house, but the anger is still there. And although you can't do anything to someone in your home, you can do it outside.
And that's okay with Athena?
Yeah. There was an American newspaper that was put out in Athens every week when I taught there. And I used to read where you get these incidences all the time, little blurbs on things like that. 2 German kids traveling through Greece, and they do things like that because they remember the war. This was in the 60s that I'm talking about. It's probably changed by now. But at that time, this was still very fresh on people's minds. So, but there's still hospitality there. If you ask for food, they'll feed you.
They'll kill you.
They kill you.
Anything else?
It was
What?
Elpenor fell off the mast.
Yeah, that's it, Elpenor. Can't think of the name.
Just have one more.
Marie?
Obviously, we're very interested in the Odyssey, but if you needed to convince a modern audience in just a few words why they should care about the Odyssey, what would you say?
Because I think that Western civilization is based pretty much on Homer and the Old Testament. And unless you know those 2 things, you don't really understand Western civilization.
Wow, thank you.
So,
Story.
yeah, it's a good story.